On the 1st of January 2026, the United States counted 86.2 million cattle. That is the smallest American herd since 1951, 75 years. Through the first half of this year, this country slaughtered almost 8% fewer cattle than it did last year. Beef production fell about 5%. Now go back to 2014. At the start of that year, this country had nearly 2 million more cattle than it had at the start of last year. And over the 12 months that followed, it produced almost 2 billion pounds less beef. Fewer animals, more meat. That is not a rounding error. That is the whole story. The animals got bigger. A fed steer's carcass this year has averaged just under 980 pounds. In 2014, the yearly average was 872. That is not genetics alone, and it is not an accident. It is a machine. And the machine does not produce cattle. It produces weight. I'm Dale Miller, and this is the production map. One quick note before we continue. Videos like this take many hours of research, writing, and production. The best way to support the channel is simply to subscribe. It really helps, and I truly appreciate it. One note before we start. Cattle are counted twice a year, and the marketing year is still running, so this season's figures are the USDA's latest estimates. Anything older is closed. If you watched the first 2 episodes, you have already seen where this starts. The corn episode ended with starch becoming fuel and the leftovers going into a feed trough. The soybean episode ended with oil becoming fuel and the leftover meal going somewhere else. Both of those episodes ended at a trough. This one starts there. But look at the map first. The corn is in the Corn Belt. The soybeans are in the Corn Belt. And the biggest concentrations of cattle on feed are not. They are west of it. Nebraska, Kansas, the Texas Panhandle, Colorado. Those 3 big ones, Texas, Nebraska, Kansas, hold about 2/3 of the cattle in America's large commercial feedlots. So the first question of this episode is not how you feed a steer. It is why the feeding happens over there and not where the corn grows. A feedlot is not built where the corn is. It is built where 4 maps overlap. The first is feed. You need grain, and you need the byproducts that come with it, close enough that trucking them does not eat the margin. The second is dry. Cattle standing in a pen do better on dry ground. Mud is a health problem, a weight gain problem, and a labor problem all at once. The high plains are dry in a way the Corn Belt is not. The third is water. Dry ground is good, no water is not. Under that whole region sits the High Plains Aquifer. Most people know it as the Ogallala. It runs from South Dakota down into Texas, and it is the reason a dry place can grow irrigated feed and fill a water tank in the same afternoon. The fourth is the packing plant. A finished steer is a live animal on a truck. There is a distance past which moving it stops making sense. Put those 4 together, and you get a band that runs from Nebraska down through Kansas into the Texas Panhandle. Texas and Nebraska each hold a little over 1/5 of the cattle in the country's large feedlots. Kansas holds about 1/5. Colorado is the next one down. Iowa is the one big feeding state that sits inside the Corn Belt proper, and Iowa feeds a lot of its cattle in small lots, which is why it looks smaller on this map than it really is. That is the geography. It is not where the corn is. It is where corn can get to, on ground that stays dry, with water underneath and a plant at the end of the road. follow one animal. It is born on a ranch, usually in spring, on a cow-calf operation, which is a different business from a feedlot, even when the two sit in the same state. Most of America's cow herds are small, a few dozen head on grass, often run alongside another job. But most of the calves come out of the bigger ones. Herds of 100 cows or more hold about 60% of the country's beef cows. For the first months, it lives on milk and pasture. Nobody is feeding it corn. Then it is weaned. Most calves spend a stretch growing on forage, pasture, hay, silage. Cheap feed, slow gain, building frame rather than fat. Some skip that and go straight to a feedlot. Either way, here is the part most people have backwards. The animal does not spend its life in the feedlot. It spends the last stretch there, arriving already grown, on a ration that shifts over weeks toward grain. It leaves when it is finished, when the market says the next pound costs more to put on than it is worth. And then it travels a short distance to a plant. So one animal's life runs through 3 different businesses, born in one, grown in a second, finished in a third. The feedlot is only the last one, but it is the one that decides how much beef exists. A feedlot ration is not a recipe. It is a balance, and it changes with the price of everything in it. But it always has 3 jobs. Energy, which is mostly grain, and which is what actually puts on weight. Roughage, hay, silage, hulls, which keeps the rumen working. And a supplement, which carries protein, minerals, and vitamins. Now, the interesting part is what fills that first job. And it is not only corn. A steer does not digest corn the way you do. A cow is a fermentation vat with legs. The rumen holds a population of microbes that break down plant material the animal could never handle alone, and those microbes are themselves protein. The animal digests them downstream. Depending on the diet, that microbial protein can supply anywhere from half to nearly all of what the animal absorbs. That one fact changes the economics of the whole trough, because it means a finishing steer's protein requirement is modest, and most of it is already covered by what is in front of it. And this is where I have to correct something you would reasonably assume after the last episode. You would think the soybean meal from that crushing plant ends up here. It mostly does not. Sort American soybean meal by which animal eats it, and roughly half goes to broiler chickens. Hogs take the next largest share. Dairy cattle take about 1/10. Beef cattle are not in the top 5. They sit inside a leftover category with sheep, goats, pet food, and farmed fish, and that whole category is around 5%. Corn and soybeans really do meet in a trough. It is a chicken's. So what is in the beef trough instead? Corn. And what is left of corn after the ethanol plant? Go back to the first episode. A bushel of corn goes into a dry mill. The starch becomes fuel. What comes out the other side is about 14 pounds of distiller's grains, carrying the protein, the fat, and the fiber that the starch was sitting next to. That is not a waste stream. Last year, American ethanol plants turned out more than 30 million tons of distiller's grains and related feeds. Here is the part that closes the loop. Sort distiller's grains by which animal eats them, and beef cattle are the single largest customer, more than 40% of it. Dairy takes the next biggest share, so the 2 byproducts go to opposite animals. The meal goes to the bird, the distiller's grains go to the steer. And they go there because they work. 50 feedlot trials at the University of Nebraska, pooled across 30 years, put distillers' grains at or above corn, measured the way a feed yard measures it, in pounds of gain per pound of feed. South Dakota State swapped soybean meal in for distillers' grains in finishing steers at equal protein and found no meaningful difference in gain, intake, efficiency, or carcass grade. Buy whichever delivers protein cheaper, they concluded, which is almost always the one that is already there. So the answer is not that corn becomes beef. The answer is that corn becomes fuel, and what the fuel plant could not use becomes beef. The steer is downstream of the gas tank. Now put the machine together. Grain and byproduct arrive by truck. A mill blends and processes them. A feed truck runs the alleys on a schedule, delivering to a concrete bunk that thousands of animals share. Nobody is feeding an animal. They are running a conversion line, and the animals are the machinery. And the output of that line is not a count. It is a weight. Everything that makes this system efficient comes from the same choice. Put a lot of animals in one place. And every problem it has comes from there too. Water. Cattle drink, and they drink more in heat. On the high plains, that water is pumped, and it is pumped from the same aquifer that irrigates the feed. The feedlot and the cornfield are drinking through one straw. The U.S. Geological Survey measured the High Plains aquifer through 2019 and found the water table down about 16.5 feet on average since large-scale pumping began, with roughly a tenth of the stored water gone. Manure. Thousands of animals in pens produce an enormous continuous flow of it. Handled badly, it is a runoff problem. Handled well, it goes back onto nearby cropland as fertilizer, which grows feed, which comes back to the pen. That is the second loop in this episode. The first one was corn to ethanol to distillers' grains to the trough. This one is shorter, and it closes on itself. Heat. A pen has no shade unless someone builds it, and a heat event in a feed yard is a mortality issue, not a comfort issue. Disease. Animals from many origins mixed on arrival in close quarters. The industry calls what follows shipping fever, and it is a permanent line item. Concentration is what makes the conversion cheap. It is also what makes it fragile. The finished animal does not cross the country. It goes a short distance to a plant that was built near the feeding. And at that plant, something changes that matters more than it sounds. Up to the gate, you are moving an animal, live weight. It has to be fed, watered, and it loses condition every hour it is on the road. The logistics are built around that. After the gate, you are moving boxes. Boxed beef is refrigerated, stackable, sortable, and it goes to 1,000 destinations a live animal could never reach. That is the inversion. Before the plant, geography is a constraint. After it, geography is a distribution problem, and those are much easier to solve. Which is why the plants sit where they sit, and why so few of them handle so much. USDA's most recently published figure puts the 4 largest packers at 81% of all steer and heifer slaughter in this country. That is, head of cattle. And the year is 2021. The Justice Department, which opened antitrust investigations into the 4 largest beef companies this year, uses a higher one, 85% of the beef processing market. Different measure, different number. The Justice Department has not brought charges. Its investigation is open. Private antitrust suits against the same companies have been in the courts for years. One more thing leaves the plant, and it is the part nobody films. Hides become leather. Fat becomes tallow. And if you watched the last episode, you know where some of that goes now. Bone and trim become gelatin, pet food, industrial inputs. That is a whole other episode. Here is what the number at the start actually means. When a country runs short of cattle, it does not automatically run short of beef. Not if it has built the machine that converts grain into pounds. The supply held because the system found the weight somewhere else. On the animals it still had. There are early signs the herd may be turning. In the January count, heifers held back for breeding rose for the first time since 2017, and USDA's July count came in a touch above last July's. If that holds, the rebuild has started. And a rebuild is slow, because every heifer kept back is one that does not become beef this year. But that machine has a bill, and it gets paid either way. In corn, in the leftovers of a fuel industry, in pumped water, in a pen that has to stay dry, and in a small number of plants that all of it has to pass through. Start at the bottom, one stake. Pull back, and it is a box in a truck from a plant. Again, and it is a pen and a feed truck and a bunk. Again, and it is a mill and a pile of distiller's grains that used to be corn. Again, and it is an ethanol plant that only ever wanted the starch. Again, and it is the same ground you saw in the first 2 episodes, growing corn one year and soybeans the next. Land into grain, grain into fuel, byproduct into feed, feed into weight, weight into beef. Corn and soybeans were never separate stories, and they were never really about corn and soybeans either. They were about what a country does with the ground it has, and this is one of the things it does with it. A production map is not a picture of where something comes from. It is a picture of everything that has to keep working for it to keep arriving. If you've made it this far, thank you. It tells me we're doing something right. Please remember to subscribe. It makes a real difference and helps keep this channel growing. I'm Dale Miller, and this is the Production Map. I'll see you in the next episode.